Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm José.
And we are going to talk about First Man.
Yes.
Which is much hyped, much marketed, much critically acclaimed.
People or at least according to the poster. I actually haven't read any reviews.
I've read nothing, but that's in the water. Looked very exciting from the trailers, I thought. I not to the point where I was crazy about seeing it, but I thought it looked like it had drama going on.
I love Ryan Gosling, so actually at the moment I'm prepared to see anything he's in.
I like Ryan Gosling a lot, and I like Claire Foy an awful lot as well. I mean, we both loved her in Unsane, the termitey.
Yeah. In fact,
Soderbergh film.
I love them both in this.
So it's by Damien Chazelle, not written by him but directed by him, who is famous for
La La Land
and Whiplash.
Yes.
And the talk is because they were both nominated for Best Picture.
Yes.
And the talk is that this will be nominated for Best Picture again, and like what a 1, 2, 3 hit that is. Like, has anyone else with their first 3 features had 3 nominations for Best Picture?
I don't know.
I'm not sure that there has been. So and it looks likely that it will be nominated. Either way, the critics are really liking it, and there's an awful lot of talk about Damien Chazelle. I loved Whiplash. Couldn't get through La La Land. I probably was a bit unfair to La La Land, but still, it just I couldn't take it.
Yes.
You obviously love La La Land.
Yes.
What did you make of Whiplash?
I love Whiplash as well.
Yeah. But this film, First Man, says to me the guy's not a great director.
I'm not convinced of that.
Okay.
And kind of we should discuss it. I think this is one of those films where the advertising is slightly misleading, because I think it has a 2-pronged kind of narrative through line, right? One is about family, and more concretely, kind of marriage, I think. And the other one is about this process of going to the moon, about, Neil Armstrong and his role in the various tests and so on that kind of led to the moon landing.
It's a Neil Armstrong biopic.
It's a Neil Armstrong biopic, but I think it's important to say it's not an action movie. It's not an action spectacle, though actually some of the scenes are indeed very spectacular, but they're spectacular to the eye. They're not, necessarily things that will make you viscerally excited, Though they might, but I don't think that's the onus of them. And actually what I was surprised in watching the movie is how much of it was about the interrelationship between family life and particularly kind of marriage and, Neil Armstrong's going to the moon. I was really, I made a point that's, early on in the film of just keeping track of how often the wedding rings are pictured. And it's over and over and over and over and over again, and they're glistening and they're foregrounded and kind of, and then actually at the beginning I was thinking, why is it doing this? Because I expected the Claire Foy character who plays the wife, to be like completely tokenistic and, he'd kiss her, go to the moon and come back, really.
Really? That's really not what the thing of this, it's all about the family and... Well,
that's what I mean.
But I mean, what I mean is that's what I expected from beforehand.
I didn't expect that.
The thing about going and the drama certainly around the danger of it. It's totally uncharted going to the moon, and is he going to die? Is he?
Yes.
Which the film brings up eventually, but that's the kind of thing I expected. I think the way the family is integrated, you can kind of compare to Apollo 13, for instance, in which again it's the same thing. Like, it's all about reuniting the family at the end, And
but this is not all about reuniting the family.
Well, Well, I had my problems, but I think the comparison's there, and certainly just in terms of my expectations, I think it's not unprecedented that like the family is the focus or a focus.
Well, for me, it is because it's not that it's without precedent or anything, but the poster is Ryan Gosling in a spacesuit, right?
Sure, but then there's also everyone has talked about Claire Foy. It's not like she's been invisible in any of the advertising and any of the hype. People are constantly talking about Claire Foy is great in this, and that speaks to the size of her role in it.
Okay.
You know
well,
what I mean?
Listen, it took me by surprise.
Okay. Fair enough.
And actually, it kind of was a welcome surprise. I like the way that whole thing is done. I kind of liked the recessiveness of the tone, right? It speaks very much of a period and a way of being. It's kind of like a Henry Fonda character. These men who can't speak their feelings, but who love, and who love deeply. I really liked all of that about the film, but that's not what I expected.
I disagree that actually that's what it does, and I think it's what it's kind of trying to do or hinting at doing, but I think it's a major problem with the film that I don't know who this guy is.
Oh, I feel I do.
So what you were saying you've been saying recently about various performances being opaque,
yes,
rather than transparent. I feel like the film is opaque in this case. I don't come out with an understanding of who Neil Armstrong is really, or why he's interesting, or why I should have cared about him.
You see. Well, okay. Well, we'll have stuff to talk about.
Well, so the question is, one of the questions is, why is he going to the moon? I said to you about 20 minutes in, he's such a passenger. He's so passive in his own life. Like, I don't get any kind of sense of force of will or personality from this guy. Not to say that he should be in charge of everything, but things just happen to him, and he goes along.
No, I don't.
He's told by his superiors, "You're doing this. You're on this team. You're doing that." And there's I get no sense of what his wishes and desires are inside. I could not get into his head. I didn't feel like I understood why he wanted to do this. Like, it's such a huge thing going to the moon, and the film somehow makes it feel like it's not actually that special.
Well,
like
I don't agree. I mean, and maybe we're not used. Maybe American cinema has become so bombastic and absurd, that we then have trouble understanding something that speaks more softly. Because I think you get a very good sense of who this character is. He's somebody who's been in the war, who's kind of fascinated by science, who loves his family, who's kind of heartbroken, by what's happened to his family, and that there was no way to help, save his little girl. And he's just constantly kind of immersed in his work, right? He's always reading, he's always gazing, he's always problem solving. He's always studying. And actually, that's one of the things that I liked about this film, that it values intelligence and knowledge and curiosity. That it's not about dummies pressing buttons and going faster. That's one of the things I really loved about it. And you get the sense that that's who he is. And he's very quiet, and he's always listening, but that doesn't mean that he's not thinking or that he's not thinking intelligently. And actually, part of him being so quiet is obviously, part of the flaw in his character in relation to his marriage. He can't speak to his children. I thought, the moment where, Claire Foy forces him to talk to his children before he goes on his last mission, and, the little boy extends his hand, to me that spoke volumes, really, about, the kind of person that he is.
There were elements of that I liked. I did like that scene, more for the force of personality, I suppose, of Claire Foy, that she pushes him into it, that, he is obviously incapable of speaking to his family, really, but actually to the point where I kind of thought, why? Obviously, he loves his family, and the film keeps on returning you to just shots of his family. But I get no sense of chemistry between the two of them.
Oh, again, I disagree.
I get very little sense of chemistry between him and his kids. I think the film is telling you that's there, but actually I don't feel like they love each other, really.
Oh,
right at the end of the film, it is kind of spoilers, but we kind of know the story, but the very last shots of the film where he's in quarantine, having returned from the moon, and she comes into the room, and they they kiss their hands and touch the glass, and that's it. I felt nothing. I didn't feel like this was somehow their relationship had improved or anything had been kind of resolved or developed in it. I felt nothing about that.
Well, I did, and I think it's one of the most fascinating things about the film, and to me, it's a major reason to see it. Because I think it is a film about marriage, not courtship, not falling in love, not like, reuniting with your family or whatever. It is actually about marriage, and the film returns to it over again. I married him for his security. At the beginning, when they play the music and they dance, you can see how much they love each other. Also, it begins in a moment of crisis. They've just lost their child, right? And then kind of she's quickly pregnant again. So I think that there are all of these things about him. And then, the way that the scenes in the house are filmed, as he gets more and more embroiled in the space mission, the house becomes cooler and it almost like visually it deteriorates. So it's not just that the house is dark and empty, and you have those continued shots of that corridor where the children run off to and so on. But it's also like the quality of the image is grainy. Yeah, that kind of, this is a home that's kind of, dark and sad and alienating. And, Claire Foy's holding all of it together on her own. I love the way that she smokes and her nervousness, and her eye, she'll all of a sudden she'll look very directly, right? So, I mean, part of what's interesting to me is also how his actions, things that he feels very deeply and can't communicate, and that he's immersing himself in work to deal with, how much they're affecting her. And, and how actually kind of all of that speaks to kind of love, really. But it's a kind of a more of a quiet love. It's a love in marriage, right? When she marches up to find out what's happened to him in one of those trials where they cut off the radio communication. I think you do get a sense of all of this feeling, while at the same time you also get a sense that this is a marriage that might be on the verge of falling apart, which is why I think that last scene where he goes to the quarantine is so moving.
I think they did later get divorced in real life.
But, well, you see in this moment that there's this hesitancy, right? And, kind of there's a little bit of anger from her at him, and he's the one who extends his hand first, which I thought was just lovely.
I saw all of it, but I didn't feel any of it. And it felt actually by the numbers to a point. I felt like, and in a sense, this is kind of what I mean about Chazelle not being a great director, that it's like the film is doing an impression of those things somehow. And it's kind of superficially resembles what a great film should look like. And I don't feel any of it.
I can see that a little bit. So, I mean, there were things that annoyed me very much.
Okay.
Right. So I don't like all the shaky cam.
No.
And there were moments where you thought, okay, I can see what the shaky cam is doing when the spaceship is hurtling down to the earth. But why is it bloody shaking on the street? Yeah, I just couldn't get it, right? There were moments where
just like a long shot held from afar of the family at the table or something is just shaking very slightly.
Yeah.
You go, I don't get why the aesthetic is extending to that. When they're in the ships, this is something that I did like about the aesthetic is there's a lot of time that you spend in aircraft and in spaceships, and they are travelling at high speed, or there's some kind of catastrophe going on. They're having to try and manoeuvre and manipulate things and stop themselves from spinning and so on and so forth. And you see very little of that from outside the ship. It's not an action scene, like you say. It's not an action movie. This is all done with extreme close-up inside the cockpits. You get these close-ups on Gosling's face or whoever else's face, and these extreme close-ups of the various dials saying alarm and showing the altitude and showing the gimbals of your orientation, this, that, and the other. So in terms of, I mean, actually, I think you get a decent sense of how that corresponds to what's actually happening. Like if you were to look at it from the outside, I think the film does a decent job of communicating exactly what the issues are that they're facing, which is a bit of an achievement, I suppose. And I like that sense of keeping it inside and showing showing it as a almost like a very individual problem to be overcome. I mean, like you hear sort of Houston on the radio talking to them every now and again. They can't really do anything. It's very much that this person has to face this issue right now, and you get a sense of physicality to it as well, which I like. But there were points in it as well where the shaky cam is so it's so shaky that actually I lost immersion, because what I then kind of imagined was the camera operator standing there just shaking a camera. Like it made me imagine something very silly happening, which kind of broke my immersion a little bit.
Yes, well, there were many things like that I didn't like. I also thought, whoever was the focus puller either didn't do a very good job, or if this was premeditated, then I don't get the reason for it.
No, absolutely
right?
not.
Because, it's almost like you're shown shots and they're completely out of focus, and then there's dialogue, and then by the time the dialogue's over or something, by the time that the film has made its point, then it goes into focus.
I think we're thinking of the same shot. There's one shot in the command center where the people are sitting in the various banks of computers or screens or whatever, and there's one person at the back in the background who's saying a line, and the camera's on the guy in the middle ground, and then it's when he finishes saying the line, the camera's finally focused on him. I don't get that. Why was that allowed to happen? It doesn't make any sense.
Yes, it's weird because so many other things are so clearly and well thought through. I actually do think that the film has
I think the aesthetic is lazy.
Yes, it has some very striking imagery, and I think a lot of effort has gone into creating, but actually it's not imagery with narrative force, like kind of, so a lot of those shots of just, the horizon, and I don't know if you call it the aurora borealis or whatever, but just, the light going over the earth, right?
Or just like the haze of the atmosphere.
The haze of the atmosphere. The faces and the reflections on the glass, right? I thought, oh my God, this is a very striking imagery, and then you think, well, but what's it doing? And you come a little bit short, right? Like for example, I didn't like all of those mirror images on the casket at the end. I think it was just kind of overdone. So I do have issues, and I think you're right that the film could have been more, could have played with your emotions more strongly. Though it's not necessarily a bad thing that it does, but it's certainly a problem with audiences. It doesn't give them much to latch on to.
I think there's a problem with the casting, and I will very rarely say this about Ryan Gosling, but I think he's badly cast, and I think the reason for that is that it kind of informs a sort of quiet storytelling that is made very little of in this. So what I mean by that is when you think about Gosling, what you think about is stillness. That's what that's his kind of mode very often. And you kind of think of like the Kuleshov effect and things, like how he reacts invisibly sometimes, like, or not at all, and he has this stillness of his face, and audiences build an interpretation of who he is and what he's thinking based on everything around him. But actually, he's doing so little. He's providing this kind of blank canvas. I think that's taken to like an extreme in First Man, where there is so little around him that it is just blank. He felt very, very empty to me, and I think he's used badly. I'm not sure exactly how critical to be of this, because it's like saying I imagined a different film to this ultimately. Like, it's not giving the film the respect of saying this is what it was trying to do. by saying, I wanted someone with more personality. I wanted someone with more kind of character. I wanted to know who this person was more. But I think the sort of stillness that the film is trying to work with, I think it just fails.
I don't think it's a problem with Gosling, but I think you may be right that it is a problem with the film.
Yeah, I'm not saying like he's giving a bad performance, but like once you have him in a film, you sort of build something that is like a Ryan Gosling character, if you see what I mean, or try and make a Ryan Gosling type film.
I mean, I think he's a great actor and he can communicate everything, but he's definitely a minimalist. So for example, in The Place Beyond the Pines, right, he's very soft-spoken, and so on. But like every time, I mean, he's communicating with his body, but then there are moments like when he cries at his son's baptism, and he just turns to the camera and does it, right? There's no equivalent here. So, here what you have is a recessive character who's depicted to us recessively, whilst even at the same time as we're being told that, he's got all this inner turmoil. The film actually doesn't show it to us.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I'm getting at. Like, and I suppose in a way this is a little bit like what I said about the film's relationship to sort of cliches of the genre, that there is a superficial use of them and actually no understanding of what makes them work. So there's a superficial use of Ryan Gosling that he looks like he does in other films. He looks like he's giving the same sort of performance, and everything around him looks like it's doing the same sort of thing, like trying to ask questions of the character that he doesn't answer, that leave kind of things up to the audience. It doesn't understand how that works in his other films.
I think you
get a lot less of a sense of who Neil Armstrong is in this than Joe was in Blade Runner, for instance. And I don't think it's down to Ryan Gosling's performance. I think he's working with the material.
Yes,
the material's not there.
Well, you may be right. But let's talk about some of the things that I really did like about the film, actually, because the film really makes a point about. I think the film is an implicit critique of America now. So it's a place where everyone's super smart and everyone's idealistic, and even the criticisms of it are in a way kind of trotted out, like too much money is being spent here that could be used in other things, kind of the space program is for white people only, but on the other hand, what you have is like, super intelligent people trying to learn things to kind of find a way forward and to explore, and to learn, and it's not kind of Stormy Daniel pussy grabbing kind of adoration of money, with being driven by just greed, right? So and I thought it was so interesting that kind of they used JFK's speech, to kind of bring it all back at the end. I thought I loved all of that.
It's funny because there was a lot of criticism from right-wing snowflakes in America about the fact they don't show the flag being planted in the moon, and this became for about 2 weeks a source of great controversy in think pieces and Christ knows what. How dare you not show this? It's the whole point of the moon landing is we took over the moon, blah, 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 America. And Ryan Gosling said something which really pissed me off, which was that we think this has been seen in retrospect more as a human achievement than an American one. And my response to that as an English person was, I don't really want the moon landing. Thanks very much. Like, you keep it. Like, I don't really want any part of it. Like, you did it and it's fine. But don't make me culpable or responsible for stuff you do. It's an American story, and one that I'm not really interested in taking any pride in. It's not mine.
Again, I feel.
And then also the film, like compared to actually what the film is saying, what Ryan Gosling has said is really not true at all. The film mentions on several occasions that the rivalry with the Soviets that makes this all happen. The Soviets have been sending animals and dogs up there and cats and people. And then there's this whole thing about the first spacewalk. We're going to get the first spacewalk, and then the Russians beat them to it. So we've got to get to the moon first. And then at the end, obviously doing the JFK speech, which I felt nothing about the moon in this film. I felt nothing about why it's important and why we want to go there and the wonder of it at all. And so then they bring in the JFK thing at the end of, we do these things not because they are easy, but because they are hard. And it's a very very famous speech, and it's rousing, and the
very opportune.
And it's like the film cheating your feelings. Like I felt nothing about the moon before this, but you're just going to show me the JFK thing that makes it sound important and inspiring.
I'm old enough to remember watching it on television. I just disagree with you. I mean, I think on the one hand, there's no question it was seen, as an American achievement for sure. I mean, America did it, and there was the rivalry with the Russians. So, it was also kind of a conflict about worldviews, and a conflict between, capitalism, and democracy and communism and totalitarianism. There's no question that those conflicts were at stake. But I also feel that the rest of the world was involved. It was seen as a human achievement as well as being an American achievement. And it was seen as a human achievement in which at that point American ideals and American democracy and American money and American wealth and might made possible for the world. But actually everyone was enthralled to the moon. And the moon landing affected everyone. I mean, I do remember seeing it as like a 6-year-old. And kind of everybody was gathered to see it. It was something that was unimaginable, and it was seen as like, mankind progressing. I mean, like the film says, only like 30 years previously, kind of there's been the flight over the Atlantic, right? So yes, of course, it was Americans that did it, but I think kind of the world had a stake in that achievement as well. They felt pride in it, and this is actually, I think, where America, the sadness of America at the moment, because really America has become the enemy. It's become the enemy of progress and learning and democracy, and a place where people can dream of a better life. You kind of, most films you see just trailer park people without health care shooting up. So, what this moment represented, I think is kind of an implicit critique, and so it was an American achievement, but it was an American achievement in which millions of people all over the world felt a share in and an aspiration to and an admiration for having accomplished it.
Well, that's fair enough. I think perspective has changed a little bit over the years, though, and I've definitely heard one too many Americans, basically taking it as trying to use it to one up America in an argument. We landed on the moon and you didn't, and I get sick of that. But I certainly take your point, and actually I think it's another problem with the film that the magnitude of what this achievement was doesn't feel reflected.
But it does. There's all these interviews with people in China. You see people in China.
Interviews. What's an interview? The moon landing scene, I hate it. Because I didn't feel any sense of how huge this was. The film actually tries to build tension around it with the music's so oppressive. The score is not very good throughout, I think, or at least it's not used well. I think it's hugely kind of overused and manipulative. But in that scene in particular, it's really trying to build this tension of, are they going to land, are they not, are they going to run out of fuel? Well, it's a little bit like Titanic, like I know how this one ends.
Yes.
So, that kind of falls flat. But then it spends an awful long time with Neil Armstrong standing on the foot of the LEM before he places a foot on the moon. Much longer than I seem to recall it actually happening in real life, but I don't know. But it's building this kind of huge thing about it, and it would be great if the film had up until this point made me feel like this is actually that important. It didn't. Like, the world changed when he set foot on the moon. What the magnitude of that achievement is incredible, and I wasn't there, but. I can kind of imagine like how huge that was. Or I can try to imagine, and the film gives me no sense of that. The film doesn't give me any sense at any point that going to the moon was inspiring. Like, not to Neil Armstrong, who's just, I think he is such a passenger, and he's going and he's following what other people tell him to do, and I don't get his psychology around that. Not by NASA, to whom it's really the most you get out of NASA is we want to do this before the Soviets do. Kind of the sense of learning and progression, all that kind of just this human exploration that was behind it as well. You don't get any sense of. You get this one thing from Neil Armstrong where early on in the film NASA are talking to him about basically hiring him. I don't think he's not in NASA at that point. He's a test pilot, and they want to get him involved in the Gemini project, and they say, I forget the question is, but it's along the lines of why do you want to go to space, or what inspires you about space, and he talks about when you go up there, your perspective changes.
Yes.
But it's a line of dialogue, and I see it nowhere else in the film. I feel it nowhere else in the film. It's lip service, and I don't feel it conveyed at all. So when you get to the moon, the huge thing that is the most important thing ever, the whole centerpiece of the film, I felt, I don't know why I'm here, and I don't know why the film has not made it important to me.
Okay, I can understand that. However, I think the film does, at various points, convey the idea of, that this is all mechanical and industrial, right? So there's that line of Claire Foy's where she says, you want to reassure me and tell me that you know what you're doing, but you're just boys playing with balsa wood, models. And you get a little bit of the sense of that. I mean, I was kind of very struck by, the dials and things not working, and also the metal of the things being dented, and kind of wiring failing. Yeah, that you get you get a sense of just how mechanical the technology was, right? That it was mechanics rather than computers, right?
Yeah. Electromechanical, at least.
Yeah, and that actually kind of made it seem, both interesting and fragile to me. That they did feel like they were in a tin box. Yeah,
I mean, it's certainly the sense of physicality of, like I say, when they're in spacecraft and so on, is really vivid. And the film, the Foley on the soundtrack is doing an awful lot. It's very loud and it's crunchy kind of sound effect. So I think it's slightly overdone, but it conveys that sense still. I mean, when really that's the time that the score drops out for the most part, is when they're in spacecraft and it's just these mechanical sounds and the sounds of whooshing and shaking and so on and so forth. Very rarely, it seemed to me, does the score come in during those scenes.
Yes.
I think that, and actually, I think the film has a good sense of that. I think those scenes work really well. I mean, they weren't hugely exciting to me, but they weren't boring either, and I just feel what was going on in them.
I think the film's main fault to me, and the reason why so many wonderful things about it don't work, is that the film is structured around the loss of his daughter. Right? So the scenes at the beginning, I mean, I think you jolted a bit because they look so schmaltzy, right? Like he's with his daughter and he's rubbing her hair, and
I nudged you.
Yes.
And I went.
And then she died.
And then, that second she died, and I was like, oh, gee, I timed that badly.
So
it's really playing it up.
So the film makes it seem as if, like, his whole mission is, to respond to, his daughter and what he said to her at the beginning of the film, which I think kind of dislocates it, right? Because, I mean, for me, the heart of the film is, A, the mission, and B, his family life and his marriage, right? There's so much about the marriage, and actually Claire Foy is so great in it. From everything, from the way that she's filmed, to what she does, to her walk, her interactions with the child. I think she's magnificent, really. So this thing with the child as a driving mechanisms of the film just feels false, really. Like it just, and I think it dislocates the film. So I think it's a big problem. And at the end, where he takes her bracelet, and puts it on the moon. I thought, like, that is just so completely unnecessary, really, and also negated by the fact, so it should be interacting. So his loss and grief over the loss of his daughter, is why he's so cool with, his remaining children, right? But on the other hand, you would think, well, it should be a spark, right? Yeah, rather than a distance. I mean, instead of throwing the bloody bracelet onto the moon, he should figure out a way to talk to his boys, right? Like, it just...
And also, actually, the daughter is largely forgotten about for a good stretch of the film.
No, she recurs because...
She does recur, but only a little bit. And when it came to the bracelet right at the end, A, it was really nonsensical. But it was like it was bringing up something that hadn't been seen in the film for decent. Basically, I don't think she's in the third act in that respect. Like she doesn't recur. She's been out of the film. That strand of the story has been out of the film for a long time and feels really separate to me as well. Now, obviously, it's informative of the character, but it's not like now that I've done this with my daughter's bracelet on the moon and I've resolved that in myself or something. That like then that affects my relationship with my wife. It didn't feel like he was connected. It's just about him.
No. I mean, there was that line where Claire Foy asks, "Is Jason Clarke the name of the actor?"
I don't know.
Yeah, Jason Clarke, who plays Edward Hickson, is it?
I don't know. I only know the ones from Apollo 13.
Anyway, the one who got burned and wasn't able to go to the moon. Right. The one who asks him when he's looking at the microscope, and Ryan Gosling tells him, "Look, if I wanted to talk to someone, I wouldn't have left the party." So, basically, yeah. And then the wife says, "Has he talked to you about Karen?" And he says no. And then says, because it's also clear that he hasn't mentioned her since her death to his own wife, right? So, and then actually there's the progression later on when he does kind of mention her to his pal, right? So actually it's there at very strategic points throughout all of that narrative in a way that I think is not to its benefit, but it is there.
I just didn't like that whole strand, to be honest. It felt...
it's false, and it actually
false.
It sets a false horizon of expectations, because if that's going to be the narrative through Fair, then actually what's where does the wife and the kid and the existing kids fit into it if it's all about this lost one, right? Like it just doesn't make sense, and it dislocates the attention from the film. And actually the other thing about it's also true to say, because I do think that the home scenes with Claire Foy, I found, really quite extraordinary and really well thought out. And I also thought that all the space bits, were also at least really visually kind of interesting to me. But the interplay between them wasn't well managed kind of narratively, really. So this just added one other layer of difficulty, one other kind of subplot that kind of seems very extraneous, or that wasn't kind of threaded through properly, really. And I think in the light of all of this, you see, then the poster, just Ryan Gosling's face in a spacesuit is very it's really false advertising.
The film just feels full of wrong-headed decisions to me. Like I say, the whole construction of Neil Armstrong's character and the way they attempt to portray him, the lack of kind of psychological insight you get into him, I think, the lack of feeling of understanding who he is. I
did feel I understood who he was.
I think remember the response that Forrest Gump got back when it came out, that people said this is an awful sort of like this guy is passive his entire life, stuff just happens to him, but then like he gets all these rewards and successes. That was the sort of really weird maybe subversive thing about that film. It was interesting. Feels like Neil Armstrong is the same kind of guy in this.
No, I don't agree. You see him at job interviews and you see him respond. And the thing about him is, he's one of those people who doesn't say anything unless he has something to say, right? And
but even then, he doesn't say anything. He evades so much. The film doesn't.
That's not true. I don't agree. I mean, there were at least 2 instances where he's with his pals, where actually he's the one who tells Buzz Aldrin to keep things to himself. I mean, he does it quietly. He says it semi-ironically, but it's very forceful.
Yeah, but then on the other hand, the film has these points where he's being asked questions that would really inform you as to who he is and what he thinks, and he doesn't answer. But it's not like a strategic not answering. It's not like the film saying in not answering we learn about him. It's the film just doesn't let him answer, and I think the film was expecting us to take that as interesting storytelling. That whole press conference where he's being asked, for instance, this is another thing that occurs to me: is it worth the cost? When they say they've lost so many people, and this is when they've just lost those 3 pilots in the explosion, in the plug-in explosion, where the plug-in test, and there's a electrical fire, and there's so much oxygen inside the capsule that it explodes, and they die. And it's starting to get press about like so many people are dying during this kind of rush to the moon, and he's doing a press conference, and it's because he's just been selected. Now you're going to the moon instead, and he's asked, amongst other things which he doesn't get to answer, is it worth the cost? That's such a great question, and actually that would be so informative of what he thinks and who he is. Like, and the film basically cuts away before he gets a chance to not answer. There's one question that he asks during the whole section. It's that there's a press conference that's intercut with questions being asked within like a NASA sort of boardroom, and he's asked questions there again which he doesn't get to answer. And there's one answer which he gives, which is along the lines of, here's a just detailed explanation of something that happened. It's like, it's not a kind of, it's just a factual answer to a factual question. And there's one in the press conference which was along the lines of, do you think you'll come back? And he said, we have every intention of coming back. It's a line that's in the trailer, which again is it's a glib, ironic sort of deflection of a question. Actually, anything real, I get so little out of it.
But actually, I just don't read it that way, because I think the way that I read his character is that he only says things that he thinks are true and right, and he's very measured in the way that he says things.
Yeah, but that's it. I feel it goes nowhere. I feel.
Well,
I learned so little from the way that he answers or doesn't answer.
I don't
those
know.
questions.
I mean, there's the moment where he's told that the people are dead, right? And you get the feeling that at the end of the line, all they're concerned about is the press, the effect on the press, or keeping it from the press, and managing the press, and nobody actually mentions the loss of the life. And then kind of you realize that, he's so tense that he's broken his own glass in his own hand and cut himself. Right, I think those things are very telling.
Sure, but then how does it develop? He goes on with it, and it doesn't really come up again.
Well,
it's something that happens right there.
So you're saying that just basically his character doesn't change, and that's a problem.
Not that it doesn't change. I mean, but then nothing is expressed about him to any appreciable degree, apart from that response where he breaks the glass. The question of is this worth the cost, as the bodies kind of pile up, has no effect on him really, or at least the effect that it has on him does not come across to me, and it doesn't become a question in the end. There's no sense of...
Well, but maybe, I don't know, I just wouldn't have focused on that question anyway, because to me the problem is that he's a man who can't express himself, and actually that's proving very damaging, to himself and to his children. He just can't speak his feelings,
The film brings up that question again. When they're walking through NASA, and it's Kieran Hines and the other guy, I think it's Deke, basically Kieran Hines expresses, he questions if it's worth the cost, and Armstrong turns on him and says it's a little bit late to be asking that question. So the film is interested in bringing up that question again, and it gives Armstrong another chance to sort of say something.
Well,
but again, it goes nowhere.
Well, I don't think it goes nowhere. I mean, I think in a way, through the Kennedy speech, and actually through, it is kind of one of the glorious moments of, America at its peak, in the middle of the 20th century, that it accomplished, this magnificent thing. The only reason why there's a film about it is because that is such an incredible thing. So the film is its own answer. Of course it was worth it.
Well, that's silly. I mean, you can't just say that the fact that the film exists means that, I want the film to show me what it's thinking.
Well, it showed you the moon landing,
But no, I mean...
And it showed you everybody across the world, in the most seen thing ever, being done. And it also shows you it also shows you him bringing back samples, from the moon. I mean, what's at stake is knowledge.
Well, the film could do a much better job of expressing that, because it tells me, it doesn't show me. It tells me that this is this is what we got from the moon. It tells me that everyone was watching it. It shows me nothing. I was not sitting there in a grump the whole way through going, oh, when will it end? I was was giving it its chance. I was really.
You were saying, I don't understand where this is going.
Yes, I did. I said to you, I don't get it.
No, I understand.
Yeah, I said that to you 20 minutes in, and I said to you an hour and 10 minutes in, I don't get it.
Well,
but that was not an expression of I don't care. It was an expression of wanting to get it and not understanding what it was trying to do. And so by the end, I'm going, the film has told me this, that, and the other, and it is about this kind of huge thing, and it's like it has expected me to just go along with it. But I don't think it's put the work. I felt like I was meeting it more than halfway. I think the film has not put the work in, and actually has no interest or even understanding of what it could be showing. I'm not saying like it even should be showing that like the moon is this wondrous place. Maybe there are other reasons to go there. Maybe there are other things going on. But the film shows me none of that. And so when it gets to the moon landing and the music is huge and you have this long thing of the long sequence of going to the moon and being on the moon, that I think the way that is all shot and edited and the scored and put together is trying to convey this sense of magic and wonder.
I think that scene is very poor, and it doesn't have...
It doesn't follow from everything else the film has shown me.
It also doesn't give any kind of emotional payoff.
Yeah.
So I think that's a problem with the film.
I think it's a weird failure. I mean, I'm not going to say it's like a bad film, but I think it is really wrong-headed in weird ways.
Well, I would agree with that, but I would also say that I personally liked it very much. It does have huge flaws, but on the other hand, I never looked at my watch once.
No.
Which I've done with other films, that you end up kind of raving about afterwards, actually. So, it really helped my interest throughout. I think Claire Foy's performance is extraordinary, and I very much like Ryan Gosling in it as well. Structurally, it's misguided, and I also think there are some aspects of mise-en-scène that are, to me, very wrong-headed. So, it's a mixed bag, and certainly don't go to see it if what you expect is like a sci-fi action film, because it's not what it is at all.
No, it's not like a version of Apollo 13. Like that is straight up sort of space disaster, whatever. Obviously, this isn't a disaster movie, but it's not doing any of those. It kind of shares some of those structural things about like what going to space is like, but then it is trying to do something different with them. But like I say, I think it's in this weird place where like it doesn't want to be so conventional as to be just like a mediocre biopic that you've seen before. At the same time, it doesn't want to go so far down like the art movie route that it alienates people. I think it gets stuck in the middle somehow.
So I think a good way to end it is that Damien Chazelle, though seemingly now consecrated by the industry, is actually for us at the moment his directorial talent and career to now is actually once more opened up to question rather than in fact kind of confirmed as a very good filmmaker. I personally thought I love La La Land, and I liked Whiplash very much, and kind of this raises a lot of questions.
Yeah, it's much more mediocre, and I don't think it's unfair to say mediocre. I mean,
I wouldn't say mediocre. I would say misguided.
No. But
I really was agog at some of the images, and then of course your head kicks in and you think, well, but what? Why are they there? What do they mean, right? So it's not. I'm not kind of using that as praise, but visually the film does have a real pull for me.
I wasn't as you say, agog at any of the imagery. It felt like I'd seen just about every shot before. There was one shot which I thought was kind of original, which was when they are hurtling towards the moon. There is a shot that it's one of the very few still shots in the whole film. It's a side-on view of the rocket. It's basically it's had its thrust and it's now detached from everything from all the lower stages, and it's just the kind of LEM and the capsule flying off towards the moon that's going to take 4 days, and it just flies across the screen. It looks very small, and you get this sense of it having been like fired out of a gun. You know what I mean? That it's just been flung, and now we hope it gets there. And it was just one shot which I thought I haven't really seen it kind of portrayed like that before. That was interesting. The idea of being kind of let loose in space and just hope you get there.
All right, well, let's wrap it up here.
Yeah, weird one.
Okay.
I hope it doesn't win Best Picture. I hope it doesn't win Best Director.
I don't think there's any danger of that. Anyway, thank you very much for listening. We are Eavesdropping at the Movies, and we are on Twitter, SoundCloud, YouTube, WordPress, and Facebook.
Yeah, eavesdroppingatmovies.com. One other thing is this: we looked at the box office quickly, and it surprised the both of us. I think it certainly surprised me. The film's budget is along the lines of $60-70 million, and its weekend box office was about 16 million domestic, which compared to Venom and A Star Is Born, which have already been out for a week, it was half of that. So that's not. They both took about $30 million. So that
doesn't bode well.
No. Especially because it's a big American story.
Yeah.
Weird one.
Well, it's. From all that we've said, it's no surprise that it might not quite connect with audiences.
Oh, no, sure. But I guess I kind of thought, like, with the star and with the hype and with the marketing and with it being a story about the moon landing.
And with it being the 50th anniversary of the moon landing.
Yeah, I guess I kind of thought, like, you don't even have to think about the film for it to make its money back.
Well, but, if the film had been more emotionally manipulative, it might have succeeded in doing that. And actually, that is very arguably, well, I would argue that it is really a problem with the film, that it doesn't show the American flag, that it doesn't show, the landing itself, like the way that you saw it on television, that it doesn't have little bits, that audience could attach themselves to and recognize, like playing Fly Me to the Moon, which was, they did. Right, kind of. There's all those memory bits that the film should have been more humble and kind of took on board and represented them to us, and they could have done it from a particular point of view, but actually that they don't bother to do it at all is a problem.
I definitely thought they could have showed the flag being planted in the moon because everything else happened on the moon was so fucking boring. They might as well.
All right, goodbye.